Welcome to the Magic Bus overview of the Exumas, narrated by the owner of the boat, Brandon Flack. I've cruised the Exumas for 3 or 4 months during the COVID pandemic, and we've been down there for a few weeks at least every winter for the last few years, and just sharing some tips and advice for our future guests so you guys can enjoy your trip, see the highlights. But I will add that what we love about the Exumas is all the things we find every time we go. And so you may very well find some cool spot where you don't see any other boats, and you go in there and enjoy it and spend a couple days. It's all good. The Exumas are spectacular. So a little bit of an overview. What we're looking at here is this is Nassau, and down here this is Exuma, not to be confused with the Exumas, which is this island chain in the middle. So this is called Great Exuma down here where Georgetown is, Nassau. Pretty big open stretch of water from Nassau to Highborne, and then the island chain all the way down. And you can see it pretty well if we slide over to the satellite, how it all looks. Getting into the details then, we're going to go into where we keep our boat in Staniel, which is right in the middle of the Exumas, and we choose that spot so you never have to worry about any big open water crossings to start your vacation. You're pretty much where everybody else is trying to get to, is like we always say. So here we are at Staniel Cay. This is the airport where you're going to land. Right across the street from the airport, and I say street, it's more of a dirt road. There's a dinghy dock here, which most likely that's one of two locations where the dinghy might be. You'll know based on the arrangements we've made with you. You can cruise right out here through the dinghy channel. As you go by the boatyard here, you'll see a bunch of sunfish. There's a nice little restaurant right next to there where you can go in for a quick lunch if they're open. There's also, you can tie up at the dock here for this restaurant and walk in, and the Pink and Blue store are right up there on top of the hill, which are two of the places to go shopping for groceries and stuff like that. You cruise around by the town dock here, and as you come out this side, you can take the dinghy right across by the Staniel Cay Yacht Club. You'll come down here by this set of island keys, and the boat is right back here on the mooring. Pointing out a couple of quick things right around here. I'm going to switch over to the satellite view a little bit. Right here, this is what they call the grotto. You take the dinghy from our mooring around here, anchor the dinghy out, and you can swim underneath this island. And it's featured in the James Bond movie Thunderball. Very cool thing to do. Best to do at low tide, easiest to swim into. High tide, you can still get in there, but it's very nice to be in there at slack so you're not fighting the current. So low tide's best. Dead high tide's good. Either one of them, wet slack though really helps. And then down here you'll find on the chart, if you look in the Aqua Maps chart, which is the one we're using, there's an iPad on the boat that has this chart on it. There's a small sunken airplane, which is just a nice snorkeling destination here for something to do. And then as we zoom out around the corner, right here, this is Pig Beach, where you dinghy in and you can feed the pigs, which is a lot of fun. We've got some tips and tricks on how to do that in the Bible. But the big thing is, don't bring food on the beach. You'll look like an amateur. It's fun to watch everybody else try that. But what you want to do is dinghy up to the beach to the point where the pigs have to swim out to meet you so they can't stand on their hind legs and try and get in the boat. Throw them some food, enjoy petting them when they're swinging by in the water. And then when you're all done with all the food you have on board, bring the dinghy in, drop the anchor, walk into the beach and play with the pigs on the beach. And if you don't have any food on you, they won't bother you. But watch the people that do bring food on the beach get chased up and down the beach. It's pretty hilarious. So those are pretty much the major things right around Staniel. I'm going to go back to the chart and zoom and talk about some of the things if you were going to go further than what we'd consider your basic super easy dinghy ride. On a calm day, you can take a dinghy ride out here to Harvey Cay. And inside this point of Harvey Cay is some of the best bone fishing in the world. Extremely shallow. It's all almost sandy at low tide in here. And really the main thing to go out here for is fishing. You can also go right around here, and this orange mark right there, that is the Foul Cay Resort. Fowl Cay is owned by the owners that own Sandals, but it's their private resort. They don't brand it as a Sandals, but you can make reservations ahead of time and go in for a really nice all-inclusive drinks and dinner. That you can look details up on that at the Fowl Cay Resort. And then this is probably beyond a dinghy ride, but Sandy Cay right here is a very pretty spot. I'll try and flash some photos here on the screen if I get to an edit of this video. But really nice place to anchor out and walk in. You feel like you're on your own secluded island. Generally, there's a mega yacht or two around it, but very, very cool spot to check out. Then as I'm going to zoom out a little bit more here, I'm just going to go back to just an overview of the Exumas. We tend to like to go north because in this range right here is the Exuma National Park, north of Staniel Cay. As you get south, there's a few places to stop, but they're not really close to as breathtaking as the park. And then it's a little bit of an open water sail to get to Georgetown, which is the next place you might want to go, but in a big easterly, that can be kind of rough and there's not too many places to duck out. Whereas if you go north and stick in this chain, no matter whether the wind's coming from the east or coming from the west, you can go on either side. Always have nice, comfortable, flat waters, and there's places to cross every 3 miles or so. So zooming back in and assuming you're going to take your cruise and going north, by the way, the iPad on board the boat has this chart again, this software, and all these tracks are on it, and you would see your boat location if you were using it on board. So we were at Staniel, and now we're going north around Sandy Cay, and Samson Cay is probably one of the first big spots we come to. And that's an excellent spot to anchor out right at that green spot. Take the dinghy inside to this little harbor in here. It's very pretty. And this anchorage is super deep water. Weather out any big storm that might be coming if you've got that on your trip, because you're really protected from almost every direction when you get in there. Really good holding and a very pretty spot to go in with a dinghy. That's also extremely protected if you have a bunch of wind in any spot. And a great place to spend the day, low or high tide, super fun in there. As we continue north here, we're going to get to what I would call my favorite secret spot, which is right here inside Little Pipe Cay, which gives you great access to Pipe Creek, which is a bigger version of what we were just sort of looking at Samson. But you can see all this is dry at low water, but at high water, it's got high tide, it's got water over it. So these beaches just appear out of nowhere. It's nice and protected in here. This anchorage right here is a little bit tricky because there's a hard bar in the middle. So as you're coming through, and again, the track's on our chart, you've got to stay off this shore, but you also got to worry about a hard bar in the middle. But it's visible as you read the water. It'll look sort of more a tannish color. And we'll take a look at the satellite view of that. And so you can see on the satellite view, you're coming in between these two. There's room for about 3 boats to anchor in here with swing room. Normally there's only 1 or so in there, but really neat spot. This little beach right over here is a favorite of ours to go hang out on. The channels through here are all super deep, but then they go straight up to sand. And it's definitely one of our go-to places as we start cruising north. You'll see this track, the red track here, that brings you around to Thomas Cay. I've done that before. It's challenging. You've got to be on the lookout as you go through this narrow channel. And I don't think the reward of Thomas Cay is really that great. But you can also get there by anchoring here at Little Pipe and dinghying through across. There's a loyalist reserve, a loyalist ruins on the island that you can go look at. The other side of the island is pretty, but it's not something that if I was just doing a 7-day trip, I'd go out of my way to go to. So continuing on with the trend of going north, now we're going to come to Compass Cay. So Compass Cay has a whole bunch of things around it where you could literally spend a day or two here. First of all, the approach is through here, around this corner, and following the marks through. I recommend this only at high tide, right around this red spot. We've bumped in the sand a couple of times before. You've got to use the range markers here on land to guide you through, because not all these markers are here. Taking again a look at the satellite, you can sort of see the channel, although that moves all the time. So you've got to have a pretty good idea of getting through there. And I'm not quite sure the reward of getting into here to this anchorage is that great, because this anchorage right here is actually very good and very protected and much easier to get to. So we'll normally come up here, line up with one of the 2 or 3 other boats that's anchored here or here, and then we'll dinghy around into Compass Key, where there's a $15 landing fee here, but it's a neat spot where you can swim with the sharks. You know, they have a little dock where you can get ice cream and beers and stuff like that. It's they've maintained the island very well. It's a nice walk over to the other side. It's a very pretty beach here. Good place to go with kids that are looking for something more than just the flat out desolate beach. There's generally a little bit more activity around here, as a lot of people from Florida may come over and stay at these docks with their medium-sized cruisers or yachts, and generally a lot of activity going around Compass Key. Michael Jordan often keeps his boat here, so if you see Catch 23 on the AIS, most likely if the boat's out there, Michael Jordan's out there with them. So then the other things I like about being here at Compass Key in these anchorages is this is, they call this Rachel's Bath, which you can dinghy up here, and this is a hike, a walk, and you know, bringing a set of flip-flops or shoes that you can walk around the islands in is a good idea for when you're walking around these keys. And this is definitely one hike where you'd want to bring something like that. As we zoom in on it, what's unique about it is as you follow this river across, you get to this point on the northeast corner, where the waves actually can wash from the outside in, and it creates Rachel's Bubble Bath here, which is a fun place for everybody to go swimming and watch the waves crash in, and it's just a really pretty spot, and I'd put it on the list to do for sure. And then this is very neat for those of you that are stronger swimmers and don't mind diving underneath some rocks to get into some caves. I think most of them you can actually see them before you dive in, but it's called the Rocky Dundas. And there's dinghy moorings here. So you can, again, dinghy out here, tie the dinghy up at the mooring, swim along this island here, and you'll see a whole bunch of different caves that you can then swim into and walk around once you get inside them. Really, really neat. So zooming back out, we're going to go to Cambridge. Cambridge is another one of my favorite anchorages because it's extremely protected, fairly easy to get into through here. I think there's a track on the other iPad for how we've gotten into Cambridge before, and you could still dinghy around to the Rocky Dundas or the cross here, Rachel's Bath. But Cambridge is really a very beautiful beach. There's a nice path across the other island. You can see this is 24 meters high at its highest point, so there's a beautiful view if you climb up there, which I definitely recommend doing. And we're going just another now to O'Brien's Key. O'Brien's Key has one of the most unique snorkeling spots in all the Bahamas called the Aquarium. It's not an aquarium you pay a ticket to get into. It's just a rock that is 30 feet deep around it on all sides. So there's just a tremendous amounts of fish, lots of good snorkeling and super live coral all around here. It's just filled with sea life and a great place to go. There's a couple of dinghy moorings. You can anchor out down here if you want to spend the night and be a little bit more protected. You could anchor out up here and then just take the dinghy into one of the mooring anchorages if you were just going to check it out as sort of a go-by thing. But and there's a submerged plane again right here you can sort of visit, which is in like 20 feet of water, so it's not quite as visible as some of the other ones, but still something to discover while you're out there cruising around. So then Hall's Pond, we've actually never visited, so I couldn't really tell you about that. Looking for feedback if you let us know. This spot here, there's so many places called Sandy Key, but this one, it's pretty difficult to access because you can't really access it from down in here. There's not enough water along these tracks for our boat. And by the way, all these numbers are in meters that you're seeing, not feet. So the depths are in meters, and basically anything over 2 meters in the Magic Bus is fine. But you follow this yellow track. We've anchored the Magic Bus out right here, and this actually becomes a really big key at low tide. And then, but at high tide, it's pretty much only the small spot in the middle of the circle. But at low tide, it goes way down here and all the way around here. And it's one of those things where you're basically on a beach that nobody's ever walked down before as it gets exposed at low tide. And a really fun place to stop for an afternoon. Probably wouldn't spend the night here because you might not have the best protection, but super nice spot to stop for a few hours as you're on your way north. Then we're coming up to one of the don't miss spots, as we call it, which is Warderick Wells. And you can come along here and anchor out in Emerald Bay or grab a mooring ball in Emerald Bay, which is super easy. If you're a little bit more up for the challenge, this crossing is a little narrow. I tend to not recommend it because there is like a 1.8 meter point here. That means you could be down at low tide around 6 feet, 7 feet, which is where I start to get nervous with the magic bus drawn 5.5 feet. But it's not that far to go around and then just follow the purple lines. And the adventure part is getting into the mooring field at Warderick Wells. There's a lot of tide that comes through here. It's only about, I gotta get my cursor back. It's only about a boat width wide. So if the boats are pointed into the wind, you have to go on the upwind side of them. Because if you go on the downwind side of them, you'll be in the sand. Generally for the Magic Bus, they put us down here on mooring ball 16 or mooring ball 9. But you just have to be careful as if the current's bringing you in, when you go to turn around, you might be trying to turn around at mooring ball 9, but you're really going to wind up at about mooring ball 12 before you complete the turn. So you're almost always better off unless the current's against you. If the current's with you, come all the way in. There's a marker down here at the bottom where you can easily spin the boat and turn it around and then approach the current going up current to it. Or any of these balls, I always recommend spinning in this area and then approaching the mooring from down current. And as we sort of see on the satellite, it's really a pretty spot. Warderick Wells is a do not miss spot on any trip north from Staniel. This is the park office. You're now in the Exuma National Park, so there's no fishing. You have to take whatever you bring in, and you can't take anything that you didn't bring. But there's a really nice trail from the park office called the Boo Boo Hill Trail, where you cross all these different parts that just look like different parts of the world. There's a few blowholes up here to see if the wave action and the tide's right. You climb up on top here at Boo Boo Hill. You walk down, you can find the trail crossing, which brings you up on top of this hill, zigzags back and forth to a bridge over Bonefish Creek, which brings you back over here to the park office. Probably about a good 2-hour walk up and down a couple of hills, some amazing views, well rewarded. Some of the good snorkeling spots are right around here in the mooring field. There's some dinghy moorings there marking that. And these beaches, there's so many beaches on Warderick Wells that you can pretty much dinghy to any of them, and you're going to have it to yourself. So if you see somebody else at a beach, just continue on to the next one, because that's part of the nice thing about being here is these are all so remote, and you can have them to yourself. Emerald Bay, if you happen to decide that you didn't want to try and do the Warderick Wells channel, really nice anchorage spots in here, and then you can still easily dinghy over into the channel. And this rock right here in the middle has some great snorkeling all the way around it too that a lot of people enjoy. So going back, now we're going from Warderick Wells, continuing on north. And these rocks are really just a lot of rocks. There's really not any beaches per se that you could get out to visit with them. So we've taken this green track before in a big southerly breeze to try and avoid the waves coming from the south. But most of the time, you would probably leave Warderick Wells, follow the purple line in a big east breeze, and then reach down and up to your next spot, which is probably Hawksbill. Hawksbill, again, another pretty mooring field. Very pretty beach to be able to explore in some of these little coves and stuff. This beach over here on the south end of it is really pretty. These moorings, again, are dinghy moorings. There's a lot of good snorkeling in there. The Magic Bus would be anchored around this purple spot or using the mooring balls. The mooring balls all have a fee for our boat of about $50 a night. They encourage you to use the moorings so we don't really chew up the bottom. and those can all be paid by donation directly to the Exuma National Parks, or you can pay at the park office when you're at Warderick Wells. But the Exuma National Parks has a website where you can pay and make the donations for the moorings. Then this is probably the furthest spot north that most of our cruisers will go, Shroud Cay. Okay, so Shroud Cay, or Shroud Cay, excuse me, to get between Staniel and Shroud Cay, we are looking at about, get my pointer going here. Is that right? Yep. So to get between Shroud and Staniel, we're looking at about 28 nautical miles. So for some of you, that'll probably be about the furthest extent of the trip, maybe even a little further than you want to go. So if the weather conditions aren't great, save it for another trip at a future time. But if you get there and you've got good weather, get there first and then work your way back is a nice way to do it. And we're looking to get to Shroud, we're looking for anything out of the east, or certainly southerlies. We just want to make sure that we're not going to have any big southerlies on the way back, because big southerlies on the way back, especially if it's southeast like it is a lot of times, it can be choppy on both sides, and that's something you want to try and avoid because the bus doesn't do great motoring upwind in chop. Again, approaching via the purple lines is the easiest way. There's a mooring field right here. I recommend getting as far north in this little mooring field as you can, and that's going to give you two good options for crossing to what we call the washing machine, which is this orange mark here on this side. This middle part of the island is all pretty much so shallow. There's really not much you can do in here. Even trying to walk through, you'd just be sinking into the sand. So the trip is all involving these two channels, which we can see on the satellite. So the first one is if you are anchored here, you dinghy through a break in the rocks, and then, or you paddleboard through a break in the rocks, and this is called the dinghy channel, but I call it the paddleboarding channel because even at high tide, it would be difficult to get our dinghy all the way through it. But paddleboarding, you can paddle all the way through here. Make sure you don't miss this turn, so bring some sort of phone to navigate with, and then bring yourself right out at the washing machine, this is absolutely breathtaking, this whole area right around here. It will take your breath away when you get there. If you're not quite as adventurous and you weren't up for the paddleboarding trip, you can dinghy from our mooring field down here to the North Channel, which I call the dinghy channel because it's deep enough to get like a 20-foot center console through almost at any tide. It's a shorter trip. You zigzag back through a couple times, and you're at the washing machine, which again is the goal. The middle channel is preferred in many ways with the paddleboards. If you go through here on paddleboards, you'll probably see 20, 30 sea turtles, baby dolphins, baby sharks. The paddleboards tend not to scare them away, whereas if you try and bring a dinghy through, you may get to some points where you got to literally try and pick that dinghy up and carry it across some really like 2-3 inch deep water. But it can be done. I've done it in the dinghy at dead high tide. You just got to be careful that, when you go and when you come back, you have plenty of water. I'll mention the tides. So Shroud has its own tide that I've been trying to figure out, through about 4 visits to this place, or 4 different years of going to this place 2 or 3 times a year. But basically what you've got to consider is that at high tide, the water going to low tide, the water's flowing into the middle of Shroud, high going to low. The water's flowing out from the middle of Shroud out, and it's also flowing out from the middle of Shroud out here. So if you approach in the paddleboard and you're paddling up current a little bit, once you get to the middle of the island, all of a sudden then you're paddling down current to the exit. So you really only have to paddle any one trip halfway across, and the other half's going to be a free ride. Same thing coming back. So the Exumas are normally like high tide in the Exumas that goes to low tide. The current all just rips through the cuts and goes this way as the water's going from Florida out into the ocean. And then low tide to high tide, it rips across the cuts going this way. The cuts more being like these cuts right there, where it's ripping through one way or ripping through the other way. But on Shroud, it really has its own tide where it starts in the middle and goes out, or starts in the out and comes into the middle. I challenge you to make some notes and try and continue to figure it out. People have written books on it. There is no one surefire way of how to do it. but we do know that, paddling across, we have 6 paddle boards on board. You can put a small kid on and an adult on one paddleboard to get 8 of you through. But it's really a nice trip. Bring your masks and snorkels because there's some cool places to stop along the way to maybe swim with the turtles even. But paddleboarding across Shroud is probably our favorite full day to do activity. And pack a lunch. Plan on spending a while down here at this beach. Leaving Shroud, there are 2 more spots to the north we can go to. The first one is Norman's Cay, which this was made famous by the Fire Festival. They tried to have it here. And it was also one of the Medellin, Escobar, cronies islands during the heightened drug trade in the 80s. So there's a sunken seaplane right here on the red dot that is a really nice snorkel spot. It's a big plane. There's a lot of things to see around it. So this is a pretty popular spot for a lot of bareboaters to get to. There's also the first restaurant you'll have found since leaving Staniel, McDuff's Cottages right here. Fairly expensive, but well done with good service. But then the approach into Norman's Cay is, again, the purple lines through here. And I tend to like to anchor out right around in this area, so get out of the current a little bit. And then we dinghy up to the plane wreck here where there's some dinghy moorings. You can check out the plane wreck and then dinghy back to the Magic Bus, or you can always anchor outside here. There's a lot of good spots around in this area where you can anchor and just dinghy in and out completely. And the sandbars inside Norman are a lot like Pipe Creek or even Warderick Wells. And if you dinghy in here, be careful because at low tide you won't be able to dinghy back out. But if you just anchor out the dinghy and leave it in the deepest spot you can find with access back out, walking across through to this other side, these sandbars and beaches here are well worth the experience of getting to them. And then the last spot going north would be Highborne. And Highborne is generally everybody's first stop coming over from Nassau. Very nice docks. If you're doing a 10-day trip, I may recommend coming in here and spending a night on a dock. Long hot showers, plenty of electricity, no need to run the generator for a little while. And the restaurant is extremely good, also expensive, but you can rent. They have bikes that are included, I think, with the dockage, at least it was the last time I was there. So you can ride around the island some and check it out. It's basically just a bunch of private cottages, but some really pretty beaches and places to go to. But these docks are brand new. It's the first place from Staniel that you could pick up more fuel if for some reason you needed to. Water, if the water maker was on the fritz, you can get water here. And there's just a bunch of nice people and a lot of activity here. Good spot to bring teenagers. Further in distance, then you can see, the open water sail that a lot of people have to deal with if they're chartering out of Nassau back and forth to Highborne. That's not a lot of fun if the breeze is coming out of the south or the northeast and you've got to go home to it or into it. In any boat, a lot of times in Nassau, they won't even let you leave if it's southeasterly in most of their Dream Yachts catamaran fleet. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on going south. We don't do it that often because the Exuma National Park is just breathtaking up through here. But if you did want to go south from Staniel, we're probably not your best tour guides because we haven't done it that many times. But if we're looking at Staniel here, a trip from our mooring around Harvey Cay into Black Point. First of all, there's Bitter Guana Cay right here. This is where you can go into this beach here and see the iguanas. It's recommended you just try and feed them leaves and things like that from taller branches that are on the beach, not bringing in food for them because they are a very endangered species. They only exist in like 3 or 4 places in the world still, but they'll come right out to the beach and eat the leaves right out of your hands if you help them reach stuff that they can't. And then Black Point Settlement here. If you are looking for like a bunch of restaurant choices and like a cruiser's happy hour, this harbor is going to be filled with people from all over the world cruising because there's probably one of the nicest laundromats you can imagine right here, right on the water with its own dock. There's 2 or 3 great restaurants, the Black Point Yacht Club, Lorraine's Cafe, and then there's another one down here on the point. I can't remember the name of it, but one of them has a happy hour one night a week. It's a third the price of Staniel. The island itself is really not that pretty. There's not a ton of other things or beaches to go see. There's some blowholes down here, but the only beach that I would say is really worth seeing is this one in here. And then there is a neat little beach right around here, but normally it's plugged in with a super yacht and only pretty much one boat can fit in here at a time. But this is kind of your stop for, I'd call it the spring break, if you're heading down to Black Point to enjoy the cruiser happy hour and the nightlife that comes along with that. There's not a lot left until you get down to Little Farmer's Cay, and we've heard great things about it. We have not been there ourselves, so I'm not going to talk about that, but we take great reports on it. Then as you keep going down, we have done this part and gone inside Musha Cay down this route. There's some more down Warderick Cay. This is where the sunken piano is that David Copperfield put out, I believe, for people to go swim and find. You can find it on the chart and make it narrow down your trip a little bit more, but some very nice protected anchorages in here, some really pretty sandbars and stuff to see. And then once you cut out there, you're pretty much open water to Lee Stocking Island as a place you can cut in and stop, or the next stop is really all the way down to Georgetown. So you can see it's pretty far down the chart. This is the entrance in here to Georgetown. When you get into Georgetown, you've got the primary part of Elizabeth Harbor here. This is Georgetown, the town proper. Really neat spot, lots of things to do on land here. Village shops, restaurants, good place to provision, very cool dinghy dock setup. And then right across the harbor is the Chat and Chill, which next to the Staniel Cay Yacht Club is probably the second most famous bar in the Exumas. Lots of global cruisers will be anchored out all along here, so there's always a lot of activity. We loved dinghying down here, down inside Crab Cay. These all become sandbars at low tide, so there's a lot of cool things to see. One of our other really favorite places in Georgetown was to bring the boat down and anchor out here for the day and enjoy these big sandbars inside Man o' War Cay. That's really dry at low water. There'll generally be a lot of center consoles and smaller boats that'll come out there for the day, riding down from Georgetown, but very pretty spot. Crab Cay, we should mention that this has a Bahamian ruins on it. And if you don't know what Bahamian ruins are, they're basically resorts that got half built. The government changed hands and the resort builders couldn't afford the bribe for the new government, so they walk away from these amazingly half-finished resorts that look like they could host a wedding today but just don't have power or electricity. And that's kind of a neat thing to go explore around on Crab Cay. But you can see again, Elizabeth Harbor is really the only spot to stop in Great Exuma. And to get there, you're probably going to have at least a 20-mile open water sail from when you've got to duck out. And from Staniel, you're looking at almost 50 miles. So it's probably something to add on to a second trip or a third trip, or maybe if you're doing a 2-week cruise through the Bahamas and you had seen enough of the parks in your first week, you could head down there for a few days on your second week. But other than that, that is the Exumas.